Did you know the richest business owner in your town probably runs something you'd never want to own? That's because owning a boring business offers three hidden advantages that almost nobody is talking about. Believe it or not, there are businesses so boring that almost nobody dreams about owning them. They don't get venture capital. They aren't featured on tech blogs. Nobody brags about running one at a dinner party. You're not going to see a founder post on LinkedIn about the incredible journey of building a gutter cleaning company. There are no TED Talks about the disruption happening inside the septic tank pumping industry. And there's absolutely no chance a boring business is going to get covered by the Wall Street Journal as a bold move reshaping the future of commerce. But here's the thing, quietly, over the past few decades, these businesses have created more self-made millionaires than most startups ever will. And the people building real generational wealth aren't the ones chasing the next exciting idea. They're the ones buying businesses that most people walk right past without a second thought. Today, I want to show you exactly why that is. Because behind the dull appearance of boring businesses lie three structural advantages so powerful that private equity firms have been quietly buying them up for years. Most people have no idea this is happening. And by the end of this video, you will. Before we get into the three advantages, I want to paint a picture of the world most people operate in, because context matters here. We live in an economy that celebrates excitement. Think about the businesses that get the most attention. Tech startups, AI companies, apps, crypto projects, content platforms, venture-backed unicorns chasing billion-dollar valuations. These are the businesses that get written about. They attract top talent, raise enormous rounds of capital, and dominate the cultural conversation around wealth. And if you spend any time on social media, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the only path to building serious wealth is to either land a high-paying job at one of these companies or build the next one yourself. That's the story most people absorb without even realizing it. Work hard, climb the ladder, get the salary, maybe one day build an app. But this story has a gap in it, a very large gap. One that most people never think to question because the story is told so consistently and so loudly that it starts to feel like the only option. The gap is this: building wealth through employment, no matter how well paid, has a ceiling. Your income is always tied to your time. Your raises are always tied to someone else's approval. And your financial trajectory is always, at some fundamental level, dependent on a company that could restructure, downsize, or eliminate your role the moment the business decides it's convenient. That's not pessimism, that's just the structure of how employment works. And the people who have figured out the alternative aren't the ones who found a hotter startup to join or negotiated a bigger signing bonus. They're the ones who stopped thinking about income and started thinking about ownership, specifically ownership of cash-flowing businesses. And the most accessible, most overlooked, most undervalued version of that path runs directly through boring industries. Right now, somewhere near where you live, there's a company picking up commercial waste. There's a pest control company making its rounds. There's an HVAC technician fixing a heating system that failed overnight. There's a roofing crew replacing shingles. There's a self-storage facility with a waiting list. There's a laundromat that opened at 6 a.m. and will close at 10 p.m. 7 days a week, generating consistent revenue almost entirely on autopilot. None of these businesses will make the news. None of them will attract venture capital. And the owners of these businesses are almost certainly not posting about their success on Instagram. But here's what's interesting. Many of them are genuinely wealthy. Not wealthy in a theoretical startup equity, someday if we get acquired kind of way. Wealthy in the sense that the cash hits their account every single month, reliably, predictably, whether the economy is booming or contracting. And the reason comes down to three structural advantages most people have never thought about. Let's walk through all of them. The first advantage is something I call the invisible competition effect. And to understand it, you need to understand what happens to an industry the moment it becomes exciting. Let's say a new technology emerges, something genuinely useful, something that clearly represents the future. Almost immediately, the money starts flowing in. Investors want a piece. Talented engineers want to build it. MBAs want to optimize it. Founders want to be the first to scale it. Within a few years, what started as a promising opportunity becomes one of the most crowded spaces in the entire economy. Think about what happened with social media, then mobile apps, then e-commerce, then fintech, then crypto, then AI. Each of those waves attracted enormous amounts of capital and talent precisely because they were exciting. And the result is always the same. Margins compress. Customer acquisition costs explode. Companies need to spend enormous amounts of money just to maintain their position. And the majority of businesses in those spaces eventually fail. Not because the market wasn't real, but because the excitement attracted far more competition than the market could support. There's a term for this in economics called mean reversion, the idea that unusually high profits in any market tend to attract competition, which drives those profits back down toward average. It's one of the most reliable forces in the entire economy. And the more visible an opportunity is, the faster this process happens. Now let's run a different thought experiment. Imagine a business that pumps septic tanks. Nobody wants to build this business. Kids don't grow up dreaming about it. Business school graduates don't study it. Venture capital firms don't fund it. Tech publications don't cover it, which means something completely different happens in that market. The competition stays small. In many towns across the country, there might be 2 or 3 septic service operators, maybe fewer, and in some rural areas, just 1. These businesses weren't built by ambitious founders with slide decks and growth projections. They were started decades ago, often by someone who saw a need, bought a truck and built a customer list, one job at a time. And here's what that means for the business today. Because competition is so limited, pricing power stays strong. Because there's no pressure from VC-funded competitors trying to undercut you to grab market share, margins stay healthy. Because there's no flood of new entrants every year, the business doesn't have to constantly fight for its own survival. It just runs. And while thousands of founders burn through capital fighting over the same tech markets, the boring business owner is collecting checks with almost no pressure from competition at all. In investing, there's a concept called a moat, a structural advantage that protects a business from competition. Famous moats include brand recognition, patents, network effects, or regulatory licensing. But there's another kind of moat that almost never gets talked about, the moat of perceived undesirability. When an industry is boring, unglamorous, or just plain unpleasant to work in, it naturally deters competition, not through legal protection, not through technology, just through human nature. Because most people gravitate toward what feels exciting and impressive. Nobody at a business school career fair is lining up to get into pest control. Nobody is writing think pieces about how commercial cleaning is the future. And that collective indifference creates a market environment where the operator willing to show up and run a good business can thrive with far less competitive pressure than almost any exciting industry you can name. Less competition means more pricing power. More pricing power means healthier margins. And healthier margins, sustained over years and decades, compound into real wealth. This isn't theoretical. The private equity world figured this out a long time ago. Over the past decade, large private equity firms have been quietly acquiring boring businesses at an extraordinary pace. HVAC companies, plumbing contractors, landscaping services, commercial cleaning, waste collection, pest control. Firms like Roark Capital, which has built a significant portfolio around service businesses most people have never heard of, or the dozens of smaller private equity groups that specialize exclusively in what the industry calls essential services. These aren't firms chasing the next exciting trend. They're firms that looked at the math and realized that boring businesses with low competition and strong cash flow are actually some of the most attractive investments in the entire economy. And they've been buying them quietly while everyone else is distracted by the next wave of exciting technology. The second advantage is about the nature of what boring businesses actually sell. And understanding this changes the way you look at risk entirely. Most modern businesses sell things people want. A streaming service sells entertainment you want. A fashion brand sells clothing you want. A restaurant sells an experience you want. A software product sells convenience you want. And wants are inherently fragile. When people feel financially stressed, the first thing they do is audit their wants. They cancel subscriptions. They stop eating out. They postpone discretionary purchases. They cut back on everything that isn't essential. We've seen this pattern play out across every economic downturn in modern history. When money gets tight, discretionary spending falls fast and it stays down until confidence returns. Businesses built around wants feel that pain almost immediately. Revenue drops. Layoffs follow. Some companies don't survive, but something very different happens to businesses built around needs. Here's a simple question. What do you do when your furnace stops working in January? You call someone. You don't put it on a list of things to reconsider next quarter. You don't cancel it to save money this month. You call an HVAC technician and you pay whatever it costs because you have no other option. What do you do when you discover your restaurant has a rodent problem? You call pest control that day because if you don't, your business gets shut down. This is not optional. What happens when a pipe bursts inside the wall of your home? You call a plumber immediately, not next week, not when it's more convenient, right now. What happens when the roof starts leaking in a storm? What happens when the commercial dumpsters haven't been emptied and the health inspector is coming tomorrow? These are non-optional problems, and non-optional problems are the foundation of extremely durable businesses. Economists have a term for this: demand inelasticity. A product or service has inelastic demand when people buy it regardless of price changes or economic conditions. Think about gasoline. Even when prices spike dramatically, most people still fill their tanks because the commute doesn't disappear just because gas got more expensive. Essential services work the same way. Trash still has to be collected, sewage systems still have to function, roofs still develop leaks, water heaters still fail, air conditioners still break during heat waves. Pests don't pause their activity because the economy is soft. These problems don't go away in a recession. They don't wait for consumer confidence to recover. They continue at roughly the same rate regardless of what the broader economy is doing. And that inelasticity is extraordinarily valuable to a business owner, because it means the revenue doesn't behave the way most businesses behave. It stays relatively flat even when conditions get difficult. Think about what that actually means in practice. During the 2008 financial crisis, discretionary businesses got crushed. Restaurants closed, retail suffered, luxury goods collapsed. But the plumber still had work. The pest control company still had routes to run. The HVAC technician still had service calls stacking up. Not because those industries are immune to economic pressure, but because the underlying demand simply doesn't disappear the way demand for wants does. People will delay buying a new car. They will not delay fixing the heating system when it fails in February. And here's where this gets really interesting from a wealth-building perspective. Predictable cash flow changes everything. When you have a business that generates consistent, reliable income every single month, you can do things with that income that simply aren't possible with volatile revenue. You can plan capital investments years in advance. You can comfortably service debt because you know the cash will be there. You can reinvest a steady percentage of earnings year after year without worrying that a bad quarter will force you to pull back. And over time, that compounding adds up in a way that most salary earners simply cannot replicate. A salary is linear. You trade time for money. When you stop working, the income stops. A business built on recurring necessity operates differently. It earns whether or not the owner shows up that day. The routes still run, the contracts still renew, the service calls still come in, and when that business generates cash month after month, year after year, the owner's net worth grows in a way that feels slow at first but accelerates dramatically over time. There's one more layer to this that's easy to overlook. Boring businesses built around necessity tend to generate repeat business naturally, often without any marketing at all. A pest control customer typically signs an annual contract. An HVAC maintenance client pays for seasonal service calls twice a year. A commercial cleaning customer needs the service every single week. Once you win that customer, the relationship often continues for years, with almost no effort required to maintain it. Compare that to a product business that has to constantly acquire new customers just to maintain its current revenue level. Every time a product business loses a customer, it has to go find another one, which requires advertising, sales effort, time, energy, budget. But a service business built around recurring necessity has customers that come back on a schedule, often automatically, often without the business having to do anything at all to retain them. And that's a fundamentally different operating reality. It means a boring service business can often run leaner than most businesses of comparable revenue. Smaller marketing budgets, smaller sales teams, lower overhead overall, because the customers don't leave. And that stability is the foundation on which real, durable wealth gets built. The third advantage is the one that surprises people the most, because it flips the standard model for building wealth completely on its head. Most people assume that building wealth through business means starting something from scratch. You have an idea, You build it, you grow it, eventually you sell it. But there's another path, one that's less talked about but often far more efficient: buying an existing business. And the math behind buying boring businesses specifically is something very few people fully understand. When you buy a publicly traded tech company, you're paying a significant premium. Most tech companies trade at 20, 30, sometimes 50 times their annual earnings. Even companies with minimal profits command enormous valuations because investors are paying for growth potential, for the story, for what the company might become. There's a term for this called the price-to-earnings ratio. And in exciting industries, that ratio gets stretched far beyond what the current business fundamentals would justify. You're paying for a future that hasn't happened yet. And now contrast that with boring businesses. A typical small to medium boring business, a pest control company, a commercial cleaning service, a roofing contractor, an HVAC operation, often sells for somewhere between 3 and 5 times its annual profit, and sometimes less. That gap in valuation is enormous, and it creates what I think of as the acquisition multiplier, a dynamic where you can purchase a functioning, cash-generating asset at a price that allows you to recover your investment in just a few years, and then continue collecting income essentially indefinitely. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine a pest control business generating $500,000 in profit per year. At a 3 times multiple, that business might sell for about $1.5 million. At a 5 times multiple, around $2.5 million. Let's say you negotiate and pay $2 million for it. If the business continues generating $500,000 per year, you've recovered your entire purchase price in 4 years. But here's where it gets interesting. After year 4, the business is fully paid off, and those $500,000 per year continue flowing, year after year, without having to build anything, without having to take on the risk of starting from zero with no customers and no reputation. You bought an already functioning cash machine at a reasonable price, and now it generates wealth on its own. Compare that to the startup path, where the majority of companies fail entirely, and the ones that do succeed often take a decade or more to generate meaningful returns. You might be wondering, if boring businesses are so valuable, why are they selling at 3 to 5 times earnings instead of 20? The answer comes back to the same force driving advantage 1. Nobody wants them. Most boring businesses are family-owned, often started by one person or couple decades ago. The original owner built it from nothing. They know every customer. They understand every process. They've spent 30 or 40 years building something real. And they're now approaching retirement. But their children often don't want to take it over. Because running a septic service or a roofing company or a pest control operation isn't exactly what most people envision for their career. So the owner faces a choice that they can try to find a buyer. And because these businesses aren't glamorous, the buyer pool is relatively small. There's no bidding war, no competing offers from venture-backed acquirers, no hot market driving valuations up. Just a business owner who wants to retire, a business that's been generating consistent income for decades, and a small number of potential buyers, which means the price stays reasonable. And reasonable prices, combined with strong cash flow and low competition, create one of the most powerful wealth-building dynamics available to ordinary people. Here's something else that makes this even more interesting. Many of these acquisitions don't require the buyer to have millions of dollars sitting in a bank account. Seller financing is extremely common in small business acquisitions. This is where the seller agrees to receive their payment over time, often directly from the cash flow of the business itself. Meaning you can, in many cases, buy a business using the income that business generates. The business pays for itself. The SBA also offers loan programs specifically designed for small business acquisitions that allow buyers to put down as little as 10% of the purchase price and finance the rest. These structures make the acquisition path far more accessible than most people realize. You don't need to be wealthy to buy a boring business. In many cases, you just need to understand the math and be willing to do what most people aren't. This is exactly why private equity found these businesses so appealing and why they've built entire strategies around acquiring them at scale. The model is called a roll-up. Buy a pest control company in one city, then buy another in the next city, then another, then another. As you consolidate, you centralize back-office functions, reduce duplicated overhead, negotiate better supplier pricing, and build a regional or national brand. The individual businesses that each sold at 3 to 5 times earnings become part of a larger platform that commands a much higher multiple when sold to a larger acquirer. The people who understood this math early made extraordinary returns. But here's the thing, you don't need to do a roll-up to benefit from this dynamic. Buying a single boring business and running it well, expanding it modestly over time, and eventually selling it at even a slightly higher multiple than you paid is a legitimate, repeatable path to serious wealth. One more piece of this worth understanding. When you buy a boring business from a retiring owner, you often inherit something that money genuinely cannot buy. Reputation. A pest control company that's been operating in the same town for 30 years has relationships, trust, name recognition in the community. People call them not because they found them on Google, but because their neighbor used them for 20 years. Or their parents did, or they've been a customer themselves since the business first opened. That kind of embedded goodwill takes decades to develop. And it is essentially impossible to replicate by starting from scratch. You can start a new pest control company tomorrow, you can build a website, you can run ads, you can hand out flyers, but you cannot manufacture 30 years of community trust at any price, except by buying the business that already has it. So let's bring this all together. 3 structural advantages. Invisible competition keeps the market protected and margins healthy because the unglamorous nature of the industry naturally deters the kind of competitive pressure that destroys margins in exciting spaces. Recurring necessity creates stable, predictable cash flow that doesn't depend on economic conditions because the problems these businesses solve are non-optional and the customers they serve come back on a schedule. And acquisition multipliers mean you can buy these businesses at prices that make the math work heavily in your favor, recovering your investment in a few years and then generating income indefinitely. Now here's the question worth sitting with. Why aren't more people doing this? And the answer is the same reason these businesses are so valuable in the first place. Nobody talks about them. The people who own boring businesses don't post about it online. There are no inspiring YouTube channels about building a pest control empire. There's no cultural momentum pulling people toward these opportunities, which means the advantages stay largely intact. The competition stays low, the valuations stay reasonable, the cash flow stays predictable. While everyone else fights over the same exciting markets, boring businesses quietly keep producing wealth for the small number of people willing to look past the surface. There's a concept in behavioral economics called availability bias. The idea that people overestimate the importance and frequency of things they hear about often and underestimate the things they almost never hear about. We hear about tech billionaires constantly. We hear about startup success stories. We hear about venture capital and unicorns and exits. So that's where attention goes. Meanwhile, the guy who bought a 3-truck HVAC company 15 years ago grew it to 12 trucks and just sold it for 8 times earnings is not on the cover of any magazine. He's just wealthy, quietly, steadily, without anyone paying much attention. That pattern plays out across boring industries every single year. And most people never see it because the culture isn't designed to celebrate it. The world celebrates exciting ideas. It celebrates bold founders and high-flying startups and companies chasing the next billion-dollar vision. And some of those companies are genuinely great. But quietly, in the background, behind storefronts nobody notices, and inside industries nobody discusses. Boring businesses are building real wealth for the people willing to see them differently. The HVAC company in a town of 50,000. The commercial cleaning service running routes every morning before sunrise. The storage facility sitting at the edge of a suburb, barely visible from the road. The pest control company with a truck, a phone number, and 30 years of loyal customers. None of these businesses will make headlines, but they don't need to. Because the greatest wealth is usually built quietly. Not with venture capital and not with a viral moment, but with cash flow. With patience, with compounding, and with the willingness to own something most people simply walk right past.